Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and more importantly, Happy New Year. Welcome back to the Sweet Nothings podcast, your home of relaxed, funny, and informative chats all about the love of eating. We'll talk about the latest food trends, controversial opinions, and all things edible. If you are new here, or if it's been a while, because it has been, let's be honest. My name is Kelly, and I am the eater, writer, and voice behind all things Sweet Nothings and of Maverick Baking that you can find on social media, YouTube, maverickbaking.com, everywhere. I'm a bad smell that never goes away. But I hope you all had a fabulous holiday period if it's come to an end, whichever way you celebrate, and want to welcome you all to what is usually the darkest month, both literally and metaphorically. It's January. How are we doing? How are we holding up? How's the bank account? How's the mental health doing? It's never an easy one. Do forgive me. I have a cat in and around my person at the moment. Audio listeners probably won't notice, but if the occasional tail flaps past my face, don't be alarmed. It's not an alien invasion just yet. So today I want to talk about alternatives to the very, very, very tired January diet. But I also want to dig into some of the nonsense from the Christmas period, which I'm sure you've all seen yourselves too, and also just touch on some of the silly things from last year very quickly, just to keep things kind of light, to keep things hopeful. And afterwards, once we get into the unironic meat and potatoes of today's podcast episode, I want to help you guys feel a little bit better instead of feeling ridden with guilt, as we so often do in January for various reasons. I want to begin by touching on some of the weirdness from Christmas time. Not going into it in any great depth because it's a capitalist nightmare, or rather consumerist nightmare for the most part, and just a bit silly overall. But some of the highlights, for example, being a Brussels sprouts cereal released by a protein cereal company that I wish to know absolutely nothing more about. Even if they were just shaped and coloured like Brussels sprouts, leave them alone. The Sprouts have a bad enough PR team as it is. Don't make it seem even worse. Don't try and transform it into something that probably doesn't even taste that much better. The Baby Bell released a giant Baby Bell. I don't fully understand why. I guess a giant Baby Bell is probably just Edam. Or is it Gouda? I can't remember what kind of cheese Baby Bell is. No one's eaten a Baby Bell and gone, you know what, I would love a version 10 times bigger than this that I could share with people. Because that's the whole point of a Baby Bell. You open it, you eat it, you make something out of the wax, and you don't have to share it. You want to share cheese, buy a normal cheese. Or alternatively, if it's a giant Baby Bell, just call it Bell. Big Bell, whatever you like. I don't know, probably a legal nightmare. Our friend Colin the Caterpillar, our friend, I should really say the mortal enemy of the Sweet Nothings podcast, the Marks and Spencer's plague that is Colin the Caterpillar. Originally a cake, now in every form possible for every possible festivity that he can be marketed for. They decided to release him in biscuit form, not as a big caterpillar shaped biscuit, but several biscuits that you could kind of sandwich and layer together to make a Colin the Caterpillar out of chocolate biscuits and icing instead of just buying the cake. I don't know. I've lost all touch with reality when it comes to Colin the Caterpillar. Um, Speaking of being out of touch with reality, Cadbury have already announced, and in some stores, I believe, already released the giant cream egg bar already. It's December when they decided to do this. I'm speaking to you on the 3rd of January as I film this, and there is already a big cream egg bar for Easter. I don't want to say the world's gone mad, it'll make me sound even older than I am, but it truly has. Something similarly entertaining that I saw over kind of the week in between Christmas and New Year, when we lose all touch with what day it is, what we're doing, how we feel, what we're eating, if we have any money left, the usual. Even if you're working, I don't feel like it gets any better even then. First we feast, which is the brand, the company that makes Hot Ones on YouTube, where we all watch celebrities eat spicy things and try to answer interview questions at the same time. They released a list of what they claimed were Google's most searched recipes for the entirety of 2023. Now I'm guessing this must be quite US centric, but I just thought I would share some of these with you guys because, oh dear. For example, the number one, unsurprisingly, was the grimace shake, which is a trend that we touched upon months ago when it was all over TikTok. It's not actually a recipe, really. McDonald's released an actual purple berry flavored milkshake to honor its character Grimace's birthday, and everyone turned it inexplicably into like a horror trend on TikTok, where instead of going to buy or remake the Grimace shake, they were showing how the Grimace shake had very kind of gruesomely killed them. No idea. No idea. Still no idea. Um, Similarly, Googled was lasagna soup. It feels very like slow cooker Southern mum recipe. Any Italian listeners, I'll apologize on behalf of my English speaking brethren. Similarly, a chicken cobbler, which seemed a very kind of innocuous recipe to be Googled above, more classic things like chicken pie or chicken casserole. Chicken cobbler specifically. I don't know if 2023 had a particularly important chicken cobbler. I missed it if we did. Black cake was something super searched on Google in 2023, though I've since found out that was also the name of a movie released last year. But black cake is a kind of Caribbean fruit cake. So I don't know if it's related to that specifically. I believe the movie had racial themes. The Pumptini, which I had to Google just to make sure I was sharing something that was actually a recipe, is a cocktail. The one that is served, or is one of the cocktails served in Lisa Vanderpump of the Real Housewives of whatever part of the world she's a housewife in. Her nightclub named Pump makes a Pumptini. It's just a fruity cocktail, basically. It looks great. They serve it in like the martini glass, hence why it's called that. The Hugo Spritz, otherwise known as the Hugo or the Ugo here in Italy, was super, super famous in 2023, which I'm very happy about because it's an incredibly underrated drink outside of Italy. It's based in elderflower liqueur with Prosecco and soda water, and usually served with mint leaves and ice, and it is stunning. It's not too sweet. It's also not bitter like an Aperol or Campari spritz. You could easily drink 2, 3, 4, no problem. They're delicious. They're delicious in the summer, but it's also not the kind of thing you'd say no to in the spring, the autumn, or the winter, really. Lovely, so underrated, so very, very happy they had a bit of a moment last year. Cowboy butter, which I feel like was something we've talked about at some point on the podcast previously, was trending for some reason in 2023. It's what's known as kind of compound butter, a butter that's melted or softened and then flavored with things. Specifically, this one had, spices, paprika, various other things, garlic, I believe, also added to it to make this kind of all-in-one seasoned butter to add to meat and things like that. Great idea. Great idea. Not a new one. Maybe the cowboy butter specifically with all those ingredients is quite new, but it's always a kind of good thing to have on hand if you're a regular or keen cook. And finally, something that, despite being from the country that the coronation was happening in, I wasn't in the country at the time, but the coronation quiche for the coronation of King Charles was one of the most Googled recipes in 2023. Apparently, I had no idea this was even a thing. So much like the much beloved and very, very well-known coronation chicken that was the kind of official dish of Queen Elizabeth the second. The second? Forgive me, Brits, my history is not good. Her big coronation dish was coronation chicken, which is basically like a curried chicken mayonnaise with raisins and almonds and stuff. Good in a sandwich. Wouldn't be anyone's go-to. Very of the time though. And coronation quiche, something that entertained me a little bit because there seems to be very little British about a quiche, a famous French dish, but it contains spinach, broad beans, and tarragon. So very green, very eggy. That's it, apparently. Probably had one similar at some point in my life, but not one I would rush to recreate, and not one I even knew existed as the coronation quiche officially, but there you have it as I choke. Anyway, That was just a little bit of, a touch upon some of the silliness of last month and last year as a whole. Obviously, there will be many food trends that I will have missed out on. There were some various things that came and disappeared very quickly on TikTok, on Instagram, etc. But it's been a bit of a wacky year for food, and that's no bad thing. So occasionally disturbing, but fun nonetheless. And that I think that's a good review for anything of a year. So I want to instead move on from 2023 to 2024. Now, we're all still going to be writing the dates wrong for the next 2-3 weeks, no problem. Some of us are still in December mentally. Some of us are already in the springtime mentally. That's just what January's like. However, we are physically, unfortunately, in January. And I know that it's a month that is usually very difficult for people. The kind of Judeo-Christian calendar focuses almost all the fun of the year onto, a week, basically, for some just a day. Um, and therefore, once the kind of festivities have passed, the savings have been spent, and we've all probably eaten a bit more than usual. Um, it can often mean that even though the first days of a new year should be fresh and new and exciting, or at least interesting, they're often considered like the worst of them all, basically. Um, and today, instead of feeding into that, instead of feeding into, oh, new year, new you, or all of the things you want to change or refurbish about yourself this month, instead, I want to talk about some things we can do to refresh ourselves, not to change ourselves, but to refresh ourselves, to change some things that will give us that taste of novelty, of something new, of something even to look forward to, as grim as that may sound, in what can normally be a pretty shitty month. So instead of giving into the annual diet and weight guilt trip, for example, let alone before we get into any of the issues with money or reinventing your entire personality in January, here are some options to revitalize little bits of your culinary life in early 2024. I think one of the reasons January is so difficult, as I just touched upon, is the guilt that comes with the end of having enjoyed ourselves over Christmas. Now, obviously, not everyone likes Christmas, but December as a whole is just full of alcohol. It's full of foods that are probably heavier and far more abundant than they would normally be in our lives. You're attending more events, you're maybe going out more, you're maybe spending more on food than usual, or cooking for big groups, preparing and eating more than you need to physically, just for the sake of tradition or for the sake of, overindulging, because why not? So, as a result, the pressure to kind of start over in the first month of the year isn't usually enjoyable or particularly productive, really, if we do it as a kind of punishment rather than anything. So if you're feeling the annual push from adverts, from influencers, or from your own scales to make big dietary changes or big cuts to your weight, take a minute to listen to these things that I'm bringing up today. And, from someone who's felt the pressure and pain of eating disorders for years and years on end and finally crawled out the other end, just know that the person yapping in your ear just now, she gets it. She understands. She knows where you're coming from. She knows where you want to be, what your brain is trying to do to you with the guilt, and she wants to help kind of quieten it down a bit. So here, just from me to you, on a few ideas that have helped me in the past to kind of refresh things a bit in January and to calm the angry voice of food-related guilt. Casting aside the intense calorie restriction or the trendy lifestyle changes, and just giving you some simple things to sample instead from someone who is by no means a professional, a psychologist, a doctor, or a nutritionist. Put your faith in me. The first thing that I would always, always, always encourage, even if you're honestly rolling your eyes a bit at the thought of getting back into cooking again, because, especially if you live in a part of the world like the one where I come from and things are dark and cold and seemingly endless, um, something that can help bring a bit of interest back into cooking, bring a bit of life back into the kitchen for yourself, is to try just even one new ingredient once a week. There are only 4 weeks in January. You can just do this 4 times if you like. Based on the fact that starting small with anything and starting simple is never a bad idea. And introducing even just 1, 2, even 3 new ingredients into your life every week is a great kind of gentle way to ease into a January reset, if you will, without it being a punishment or without it being masochistic or, something that's just going to stress you out in an already unpleasant time of the year. Whether it's a fruit, a meat, a grain, or even just, one single spice that you've never tried before, seeking out something new always somehow makes us feel good. Our brains like novelty, whether it's new music, a new film, meeting new people. It does us good, mentally, and that can help a lot, even if it's something very, very, very seemingly insignificant. For example, you could try out a new cooking method. You could try out a flavor that you've always kind of wanted to or that you think you'll like, but you've just never really had the occasion to, whatever it may be. For example, I filmed a video at some point last year, or even the year before, I don't remember at this point, in which I only ate food that I had never tried before for a full 24 hours. And not only did it make for like a good personal challenge and just something fun to do with a day off, but the planning, the shopping, the cooking, and the eating were all enjoyable, which isn't always the case when it comes to food prep. It can be very stressful, overwhelming, tiring. Of course, there were some things that I tried that day that I then wouldn't rush to try again. I had some things, for example, that were pre-prepared foods that I'd never tried before that weren't the best. But I had a couple of other things or some combinations of things I'd never had together that were some good discoveries and things that I'd never even heard of previously to seeking out new food. It's not something you have to plan days and days ahead if you don't want to. Just next time you're in the supermarket, grab something that you wouldn't usually, whether it's as I said, a fruit, a vegetable, meat, a grain, a sauce, anything you like. Maybe you won't like it, but maybe you'll love it. And either way, it's just something a bit different. It's just something to feed your tired January brain with. Similarly, if you want to branch out a little bit more, something else I would always advocate as an alternative to dieting or to crippling, diet plans, for example, weight loss goals and things like that, is not just trying a new ingredient, but trying one new dish a week. It's likely that you're eating 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 times a day. Introduce something a little bit new. And by that, I don't mean something that means you have to break the bank or that means, something a little bit scary or foreign to you necessarily, but pushing yourself to try new dishes, it's good for us, I think, and it's a good way to make it feel like you're doing something interesting in January when so few of us have any interesting plans going on. Like I said, it doesn't have to be anything expensive or complicated, just new. Even if it's just new to you and everyone else has already had it. It's something I always like to do in the first month of the year, but it's also something that I feel helps me if I'm in any sort of period where I feel a bit disillusioned or tired of my eating routine or food habits anyway. For example, in the summer, I often fall into routines where I'm just eating cold things straight from the fridge. I'm just having salads or I'm just having tomatoes, mozzarella, and bread. And of course, that's delicious. But then you get into it and you're like, am I actually enjoying what I'm making and eating now? Or am I just doing it? Um, so this is something even to try, not just in January, but something to try between the seasons. If there's a weather change or when your schedule changes at work or something like that, or even just to perk yourself up in any kind of transitionary period, which January often feels like. Obviously, I know it could be something that's difficult to do if you have a family to feed and you're the one doing so, or if you have picky eaters that you live with. You know, Obviously, the thing you make that's new might not become a new favorite dish, or it might not even turn out very well because first time recipes don't often do so because some of us don't follow recipes very well, pointing at myself. Or, you might be in a country that's different from the one the recipe was written in, the ingredients might be a bit different. Who cares? Who cares? The point isn't that you'll be presenting it like you're on a cooking competition or perfecting your skills. It's just to try something new, just to make a change. It's maybe something you've had recommended to you but never tried, or maybe something they use as a favorite ingredient in a new way. Maybe just something you saw while scrolling through, reels on Instagram or through TikTok. Give it a go. Why not? To push yourself even further beyond that, another kind of good alternative to the January diet, the January crash, the January big lifestyle change is to try cooking your way through a recipe book. So, for example, instead of just trying one new ingredient or one new dish every 7 days or so, pick up the cookbook that you perhaps just flicked through for one or two recipes, or worse, that you just used to decorate a shelf. Perhaps you already have a few lying around that were interesting enough to buy or were intriguing when you were gifted them, but you just never really found them intriguing or interesting enough to actually use them. Perhaps you received a new one for Christmas. Perhaps you want to buy one and just need a good reason to spend the money. Working your way through a cookbook, from my experience and from seeing other people's experiences documented online, can be a great way to explore a cuisine that you love, or to give kind of extra appreciation to a chef or to a food writer that you love. For example, I enjoy everything that Nigella Lawson touches, so I would trust her enough to do this. The good thing about cookbooks is that even if it's something, specific like a Christmas cookbook or a barbecue or an air fryer cookbook, they usually cover a range of, occasions, a range of courses, whole menus, meaning that you can try anything from slow cooked dishes to sides to sweets and desserts. You're very rarely limited in a whole book to just very small specific things, meaning it can be good for whatever level of hunger, whatever the budget, whatever you're feeling like. There will be recipes in most cookbooks to cover most of those moods. Nothing says you have to go kind of page by page from the beginning or in any particular order. You don't have to go very specifically from, page 1 to page 100 and something, unless the book specifies that that's how it's to be done. You can start whatever you like, just making sure to work through as many as you can or as many as you want to push your boundaries, both in terms of cooking and in eating. I did this, for example, with one of the Cordon Bleu books, the Cordon Bleu pastry school book, which focuses mostly on kind of patisserie techniques with varying levels of difficulty. I split it into categories like chocolate, and biscuits and various other things, and did them one at a time, taking it section by section. And I documented the whole thing a couple of years ago on YouTube, and also shared some of the recipes or my versions of the recipes on my blog too. And not only did it like reignite my love and adoration for baking and patisserie in general, during a not great time in my life, to be honest, it also let me test and learn new techniques that I'd never tried before and probably would not try without having me kick up the arse to do so. If that makes sense. I was making fancy molded chocolates and, resting freshly baked brownies for 12 hours to reach a specific consistency, which I would probably never think of or never bother doing if not doing this to push myself. And I loved it. It's something I really want to kind of take up again if I find a book that inspires me to do so. And even though that was dessert based, it still had a great, great kind of motivating effect for me personally. Somewhat similarly, why not try a new cuisine once a week? And not necessarily just, learning to cook it and buying a whole range of new spices or ingredients that you might not like or use again. You know, you can cook it, or you can just order a new thing each week through your favorite food delivery app, just something you've never had before. Either way, it's a good way to make your diet and your day to day life just a little bit more exciting, a bit more interesting this month. Whether it's trying a new place in your area, a new place on one of your apps, or delving into some cookbook recipes or online recipes from a cuisine that you like or one you've never tried, from a place that you've never been to. It can be great fun and it can be a discovery, whether good or bad. Last month, for example, I tried Korean food for the first time thanks to a South Korean place that's opened nearby where I live here in Italy. And I've also kind of experimented with this doing my Dessert of the World series on the blog and on my YouTube channel, where I've, cooked things from Australia, I've cooked things from Mexico, I've cooked things from places I've never visited before and found something either that I thought I would like and didn't that much. Still a good discovery though, or something that I wasn't so sure I would be happy to make or eat and really, really enjoyed. And these are things that we would rarely do without doing them, if that makes sense. I'm unlikely to open the internet and search, Ghanaian and Kati cake, but I did for the sake of that series. And it was great fun. And, as with many things on this list and many things we're talking about today, you might not like it as much as you expected, and that's fine. Or you might find something wonderful about it, or you might find a new technique that you'll use, even if not for that specific recipe or that specific cuisine. This is especially good in January because, the festive season is often so laden with traditional foods like Christmas puddings and mince pies and panettone and things that you enjoy them at the time, but you crave something new, something fresh, something different come January. And, to break from the dishes that you've eaten for years on end and jumping immediately into a diet plan, just break into a totally new cuisine instead. Why not? And the final alternative I want to kind of touch on in today's episode to the January diet, offering you something new, something different in January, a switch up to your diet or to your cooking routine, is going vegan for a month. Don't panic. Trying veganuary, if you will. Now, I will add the disclaimer that this is an idea that not everyone loves, and it's also not one that's entirely separate from the very, very weight loss focused rhetoric of every January. However, its controversy is not always entirely warranted or deserved. It can be something, going vegan can be something that people do for many, many reasons, whether it's for the principle, the morals of not eating animals whatsoever, whether it's a political choice, whether it's a dietary choice. But lots of people also do it for the sake of having an excuse to restrict their calories or an excuse to lose weight. And they often can't do it very long term because it's not good for them, because they're not eating in a balanced way, they're not enjoying it, they're doing it as a form of punishment. However, it is very much possible to do so without it feeling like a punishment. For example, I went completely vegan for January 2020 and also again in January 2021. And I enjoyed it and got a lot more out of it than I expected that I would. It was exactly the kind of refresh, that reset that I needed after a lot of the traditional foods, after all of the leftovers that just seemed to go on forever after Christmas, for example. And it made every single day, every single meal different in an otherwise very dreary and monotonous month. I tried new foods like tempeh and plant-based vegan yogurts. I had to learn to recreate my favorite baking recipes without staples like butter or eggs or milk, which was a great challenge. It's good for the brain to challenge yourself to do these things. And I made some things that were unexpectedly delicious. Also had some disasters, both sweet and savory, but this is how you learn. There were days also that I felt kind of frustrated that I couldn't rely on these staples or that I couldn't just buy the normal foods that I would buy on days that I was working, for example. I must say that I worked a desk job for the first year and was working from home for the second year, which does make things a little bit easier than if you work shifts or if you work nights or if you eat at work, with food provided from your workplace. And even then, there were days when it was frustrating, or there were days when I didn't really want to choose something plant-based for the convenience of it, but I did. And I never felt bad for doing so. And knowing it was only for 31 days, for just those 4 weeks for that month made it so much more motivating. Because I wasn't doing it as a big lifestyle change, or I wasn't just kind of generically saying, okay, I want to cut down on animal products. It didn't feel like a punishment, even if it was a huge change to my diet as someone who is usually obsessed with, all things cheese, eggs, yogurt, ice cream, all things dairy, basically. Meat doesn't excite me as much as dairy products do, but it didn't make it easy to get rid of either. But doing so just for that month, I'm a deadline girl. I like to be able to see a finish line to kick me up the arse to motivate me to do things, and veganuary was perfect for that. I wanted to see if I could achieve a month without animal products and to challenge my own ability and creativity in the kitchen. And January was the perfect month to do it. You don't have any other distractions. It's unlikely you have other things going on similar to other months of the year. And it was just a good time to get myself stuck into a little project for myself and, also for a kind of creative outlet outside of just the usual routine of get up, work, sleep, basically. And while I'm usually against the idea of restriction of any kind, especially in January, it was one that improved my skills when it came to cooking and improved my understanding of the science behind certain ingredients and why some are necessary in certain recipes and what they can be replaced with, which again, you can always read about online, but seeing it in person, messing it up in real time with your own ingredients that you bought with your own money is a much better lesson than any of that. And not for the sake of messing up recipes, but for the sake of challenging yourself and trying something new, I'd recommend it to anyone for just a month. And those are really all of the kind of alternatives I want to share with you guys as just some things to try out in this first month of the year. The one that I want to kind of point myself mostly towards is to trying just a new dish once a week. So something pushing myself a bit more than just a new ingredient, but trying a new dish. It's occurred to me quite recently that, I've been in Italy for 2 years now, and there's still so many things that I love eating or ingredients that I love or that I admire when I go shopping, but I've never cooked or I've never cooked with before. So that's what I want to kind of focus myself on, whether I do it just once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever it is. That's what I'm kind of focusing on this month to keep myself invigorated and interested in food and doing something creative. If you guys have tried any of these before, if you're trying any, or if you have any better ideas, which I'm sure you do let me know. I'm always interested in people's personal experiences with this kind of thing. So feel free to send me an email at maverickbaking@outlook.com. Feel free to drop a comment, whether it's on YouTube, social media. You can find me everywhere at either Sweet Nothings Podcast or Maverick Baking. Similarly, if a few weeks down the line you've been trying these and they've helped, or not helped, do let me know that as well. It's always lovely to hear from you guys, and you guys keep me on my toes and keep me inspired all the time with your comments, your messages, everything. But that's what I have to offer at the moment. January does not have to be this guilt-ridden misery train. It can be if you let it be. And it also doesn't have to be, a month in which you restrict yourself and make yourself miserable and then just bounce back to normal or bounce back to excess in February, March, April, whatever. Diets at this time of year very, very, very rarely work. It's very difficult to keep yourself motivated to be restrictive for more than a week at a time. And especially if you're someone like me who has a history with, or, experience currently with disordered eating of any kind, do look after yourself even more than normal this month. Get enough rest, find ways to relieve stress, find ways to stay creative and to stay enjoying yourself as much as you can, because I know how much those things can kind of bleed into what is already a difficult time. And do dabble in one of the things I've spoken about today if you have the opportunity to. But I'm afraid that is all I have time for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening as always, and I will see you for the next one.